Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to Therapy for Your Money. In today's episode, we are talking about partnerships, which is an episode that I've been meaning to record for a long time, and also that we get a lot of questions about. So, a lot of you submit questions to Therapy for Your Money, and a lot of them are about partnerships. So, joining me today, we have Dan Mayer, who is an
Hello.
attorney. Hey, Dan, you are a repeat guest on Therapy for Your Money. And we have also
Happy to be here.
Dave Yood, who is a practice owner in a partnership. So we've got a really, really interesting perspective. And you are both the hosts of the Protecting Your Practice podcast. So Dan, why don't you start off and tell us just a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Dan Mayer. I am the owner of Mayer Law. We are a practice that at this point, I think is safe to say we specialize in working with mental health practices. We did an internal audit, I think in March, and we work with about just over 100 ongoing practices right now. And our focus really is acting as the corporate counsel for practices. So this topic of partnerships comes up a lot. I always like to say to people that in addition to my own personal experience as an attorney working with practitioners, my wife is a practitioner and has her own practice as well. And so therefore she has a partnership. And, when she first started, I kind of got roped in. They were like, "You're going to be doing this, right?" I said, "Sure." But they've grown since then. So through her
Yeah.
own experiences as a member of a partnership, through my own experiences, I like to think I have a little bit of knowledge, some experience here about this topic. So thank you again for having me.
Yeah. And Dave, tell us a little bit about you and your partnership
Yeah,
experience.
we started Maryland OCD and anxiety therapy in 2021, right in the heart of the pandemic,
Mhm.
back when expenses were low because we didn't have to pay rent, and that was
Sure.
awesome. And we started as a two-person operation and have since grown to a three-person partnership operation. And we have gone through a couple iterations of, are we a partnership? Are we an S corp? Are we a partnership? And that was a whole journey. But here we are, the three of us running our fun little LLC, providing OCD, anxiety related therapy to teens and adults in Central Maryland.
And still hopefully liking each other mostly 3 years
Remarkably, we
later.
do. Well, I will tell you one key to still liking each other is that we're all in a band together, and that helps with the communication and with making music together. It's really
Tell them the
fun.
name.
We are OCDC, the band.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh, I love it so much.
we do like a little pun now, don't we?
It's
So
awesome.
yeah, it's so much fun. We get together in my basement every month or two and jam out with our another friend of ours who we used to work with, and it's great. So we actively like each other and don't dislike each other, and that I call a win.
All right, so you heard it here first. If you want to be in a successful partnership, you need to also be in a band.
With a
Yeah,
clever name, no
obviously.
less.
Yeah.
Obviously. All right, so let's talk partnerships. When it is not uncommon for maybe two coworkers, two practice owners who happen to know each other to say, you know what, friends, we should just start a practice together because it feels easier than doing it alone. And like, oh yeah, we're just going to go into a partnership.
Julie, that's
Um,
literally how we started.
okay, okay. So where, if that's what you're thinking, where should you start? Not necessarily where did you start, but where should you start with hindsight?
Well, I'll say first, and I've had this happen, where people come in and say, "Oh yeah, we were friends. We thought it'd be so cool to start a practice." And, okay. So I start, asking questions and talking about what,
Hmm.
their vision is and what they want to do. And eventually we'll get around to agreements and paperwork. Oh, we don't really need an operating agreement, but we're friends, so we're not really worried about it. And I say, okay, right,
False.
stop. We're not doing that. Because even the best of friends, especially when money and business gets involved, if things go south, it gets very, very hard and ugly to unravel, right? Whereas, you can be the best of friends. And since we're talking about partnerships, the way I equate it is, having some sort of agreement when you are starting a business, if you're going with a friend or someone you're not a friend with, it's like having car insurance or house insurance. Okay.
Mm,
You're not intending for the house to burn down. You're not intending to get in a car accident. But the point is, if it happens, you have coverage, right?
Yeah.
And an agreement, one of the initial things you could do, an operating agreement, partnership agreement, what that does is it lays out everything. So if there is an issue, there is a way to resolve it.
And my opinion is that the partnership agreement forces people to talk about the difficult, uncomfortable things that you really do need to be talking about before you go into business together.
That, and also, what happens before it happens, right?
Hmm.
So, okay, who is going to have access to the money? Who is going to have the right to make decisions, big decisions about the business? If you have 5 or 6 partners, does some of them have more interest or voting power than the others? Does
Hmm.
everyone have equal voting powers? One thing you see, not in like your case, Dave, but like, let's say when you have 2 partners, just 2 partners, now it's 50-50. Well, what happens if there's a deadlock, right? Now all of a sudden there's a big decision to be made, neither person agrees, and you're stuck. You're like, how do we resolve this? That's where this, partnership agreement steps in and says, we've already decided these issues. And to your point, we've thought this out and we've come up with answers, and they're now on this piece of paper. Right. Now, one of the key parts I always remind people is this is not being written in stone intentionally,
Yeah.
right? It is meant to be changed. It is like, a personal estate plan or a business succession plan, in that it may change over time, and it should, right? You shouldn't just throw it in a drawer and forget about it. The fact is, at time you may update it, but the point is to get something in place when you're first starting.
Yeah. And so what are some of the key elements that need to be in that partnership agreement?
So it's everything from who are the members, right? Who are we talking about here, right? To, okay, what are the interests? Am I going to have 50% interest? Are we going to have, if we have 3 partners, 33.3 or so percent interest? How's that going to break down? And now that we've decided that, how does voting work, right? Who has the right to vote, and when? Who gets to make decisions, right? How are tax, we big thing with, I know you as an accountant is, we're just talking about the profit first method. How are taxes going to work? How is funds going to be allocated, right? And what I say to practitioners is every single decision that you think needs to be made, or even aware of, that needs to be made about a business and how it's going to run and who's going to do what, can be laid out in a partnership agreement. It is really can be that comprehensive. I've seen some that are simple, but I've also seen some, especially when there's a lot of people involved, get very complex. But that framework is what allows everyone to know, as I call it, what the rules of the game are, right?
Yeah.
What are the ground rules everyone's already agreed to right off the bat?
So do you vote simple partnership agreement or detailed? Like, what's your preference?
Well, that's the thing. I think from practice to practice, the needs, one doesn't fit another one, right? So taking a boilerplate practice or operating agreement or partnership agreement doesn't just work just to apply it to everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, especially if you're out there and you're going to consult with an attorney on this, it's important for them and you to kind of come to understanding of what you need, what you're looking to do, right? And then that's going to get reflected in the agreement. And so, simple, it can't just be like, we're a partnership, great, right? It really does need to have, what are the tax treatment? Are we going to be an LLC? Who's going to have membership and ownership? And, are you putting money in? Am I putting 5,000 in, or are the rest of the partners putting a certain amount in? What
Yeah.
happens to the amount, at the end of the year or on a quarterly basis, or however, many times throughout the year we want to agree to? Is there going to be an ownership draw, right? All the things that run the practice go in there. And I tell practice owners, it's one of those things where, if you think of it, it probably is going to get talked about in there, right? Because the goal is that if we're not sure how to do something, if we have a decisive a decision that needs to be made and we're disagreeing, the ownership agreement should tell you, okay, voting
Yeah.
goes like this. This is how this works. And so it, like I said, it gives you a layout. Okay, we're going to hold a vote, and here's what's going to happen. And the unanimous consent or majority decision making, it lays out the groundwork so that if the parties aren't getting along, now they're in a stalemate where they need to get each legal counsel. It gets ugly. Now, the partnership agreement is meant to really help clarify some of that so you don't have to go down that path, because it can get really ugly, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the areas where if you're going into the partnership, I think you should spend some serious money working with an attorney to talk through it,
Yeah.
because just going to a legal Zoom partnership agreement, like it can work, right? It can get the job done, but it's not going to be that um, neutral third party that's asking the hard questions. Because I cannot tell you how often on the tax side we've had a partnership where there's resentment. Two 50-50 partners, that means on the tax side, unless otherwise stated, you share the profit 50-50. You each get taxed on it, you each get to take it out. If one partner is seeing all the clients and the other one is doing all the administrative work, the one who's generating all the revenue generally feels like, well, I'm generating all the revenue. I'm bringing in the money and they're not. Why are they getting paid the same? This is what the partnership agreement said. And there's nothing to be done there. Like, this is what you agreed on. So talking through those hard things.
And that can be modified. And the other thing, it's sort of similar to the situation you're describing, is what if one partner puts in more money?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
What if one partner says, you know what, I've got a lot of capital, I'll put $50,000 in. You know, I'm not expecting you to have that kind of capital. You put in 5,000 and we'll go from there. Great. But when it comes to time to, you know, getting a profit, if I put $50,000 in, don't you think, you know, I might say I want to have a larger share of the profit because
Sure.
I put the larger money. And that's where the partnership agreement can come into play.
Yeah.
And by getting that up front, right down the line, you don't have a disagreement because you've already had that conversation.
Yeah.
To your point,
We've already talked about it.
and to your point about fees, that's the thing. It's sort of like you get what you pay for, right? So, you know, I've had practitioners come to me even say, "Oh, wow, that's a lot," but I'm like, "Listen, I'm not just having a half-hour consult with you here, right?
Yeah.
We're actually having you fill out a questionnaire, and then we're taking that information and we're drafting an agreement, and then we're sending it to you, and you're reviewing it and giving us input, and then we're drafting, and so it's like a multi-step process that takes a lot of time."
Yeah.
And it's something that's going to be, you know, like I said, it's not something you just throw into your drawer and forget about. It's something that you need to have on file somewhere that you can readily access, and at times may use throughout the length of the membership, the LLC, or the practice. The other thing I'll say though, to LegalZoom's credit, is if you're a solo practitioner or if you're a sole member, you know, it can be useful to have an operating agreement too. And so, yeah, maybe then you could go on LegalZoom and just draft something really quickly for yourself, right? Because you're the only one making decisions. So it really isn't going to have as much consequence as if you had two people making decisions, because presumably you're not going to be arguing with yourself about this.
Right. Usually not. So
Right.
I'm impressed that you as an attorney are saying like, okay, you can use LegalZoom for some things. So I kind of agree with you. Like there's some
Right.
simple
Yeah.
situations where like it's fine. It's fine.
It's funny,
Yeah.
on our podcast, so often Dan just jumps in and says, "This is where I say consult with an attorney," and it's become a running gag because he says it like every
All the
5
time.
words. So it's also unique for me to hear this as well.
To hear that perspective.
I am a believer in, and I like to think my clients know that I preach this to them, that I'm not going to tell a client to do something that they don't need to do, right? And if you're a solo owner and you just need something simple to put on paper, or the bank says we need an op agreement for you, sure, I think it's probably fine, very basic bones, you can do it.
Mhm.
The reality is, though, is that that's not going to be conducive to, it's not going to be that detailed. It's not going to be very specific to your exact needs. If you want something that needs to be more robust, that really needs to be specifically tailored to your practice, which is a good idea, right? So I don't want to lead people away from that either, that it is a great idea to have a detailed one, and it's very well organized and details every single thing you need to have. Sure, then yeah, you should be consulting with legal counsel. The other thing I've seen, and I've had clients do this, is they'll bring me a LegalZoom document
Mhm.
and they'll say, well, here's the one I have. Can you take a look at it? Right. And then we'll take a look at it. And there are times where we say, okay, it's time to update it. It's time to really make some changes here. But I just wanted to make that point for solo owners. Now, if you are like Dave, you have 2 other members or partners, or you're, just have one other partner. No, I do not think, quite honestly, you should be going to a LegalZoom
Yes.
route. You
Right.
should
And-
absolutely be going to an attorney much as you'd be going to someone like Julie to do your taxes and accounting for you.
Please,
Because,
please do.
right, the
Do not do
reality
your
is,
partnership taxes
yeah,
by yourself.
if you're a therapist or a practice owner, I have no doubt you're very good at what you do, right? So I am not trying to do clinical therapy. I'm not allowed to do clinical therapy. I don't want to do clinical therapy. That's not my bag, baby, right? But the same thing is true for you. If you're listening to this and you're an owner or a practice owner, go to someone who's an accountant, go to someone who's an attorney to help you with this stuff, because the consequences of not getting it right can be so much more expensive than what it would have cost to done it right the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dave, I want to ask you, how did you first set up your partnership, and would you do it the same way if you were starting over today?
There's sort of two parts to that. There's the partnership part, and then there's the tax part.
Okay.
The partnership part, we took like our sweet time figuring out our partnership agreement. We did not rush into that one. And to Dan's point, we're already pretty good at talking about things and talking about what's on our mind in our professional life. And so we just sort of, the partnership agreement, it's not that it forced us to have these conversations, but it guided these conversations that we were already going to have anyway, of how do we want to treat each other? What happens if we disagree? We already wanted to kind of hash that out before we really got moving. And the partnership agreement helped guide that, of like, if there's a difficult decision to make, how do we make decisions? And how do we weight that? And, I really credit talking with a friend of mine who also is a part of a practice with two other psychologists, who just kind of said, like, listen, we already debated and answered these questions for us. Here's how we thought about it. And so, we went into it thinking like, oh, if we do something, we want it to be unanimous. And we knowing what we know about systems theory and stable coalitions, which is a fancy term for sort of two people ganging up on the third. We wanted to make sure we avoided any dynamics where somebody felt just sidelined,
like
and
pushed
so
out almost.
Because once that happens, once somebody gets disgruntled, the entire thing falls apart, and none of us want that. So we're all very mindful of each other's feelings and wanted the document to reflect that. And so the operating agreement really kind of helped us figure out exactly how to manage that. And then there's the tax part, which ended up being a mess. We wanted to have a model where the three of us are actively seeing patients, and we wanted to pay ourselves based on what we billed for. And we were an S corp, and it turns out that was not workable as an S corp. And then we were told we were stuck in an S corp, and then we got another accountant to weigh in on it, and that accountant was like, no, you can go back, you're just stuck with that for 5 years. So we figured it out eventually, but
so you're back to an LLC at this point?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So what you're describing, where you're actively seeing clients on the accounting side, we unofficially call that you eat what you kill. How do you call it, Dan? Like, is that
funny you say that?
Actual legal term for that?
I was just talking to my partners about appearing on this podcast, and they're like, maybe don't use that term because maybe some people might not like it.
That's
I
true.
don't know.
If you're vegan, I'm sorry.
Fine.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, is it offensive? I am not sure.
I don't know. I think it's fine.
I guess the way I look at it is you get paid for the business you bring in.
Yeah.
Is how I would describe it.
It's probably a nicer way to say that.
and Dave, to your point, that's another really big risk that you mentioned and why a partnership agreement makes sense is that, maybe it's not that the three partners are getting along. Maybe you have two who are getting up in a third. If you have three partners with 33.3% interest or thereabouts, and the two agree on one thing and the one doesn't, well, technically the two do actually outweigh and can outvote the first, unless you organize the partnership agreement in a way that is collaborative, that is conducive to ensuring, to your point, that the one who's kind of not agreeing isn't just kind of shut out, right? There is a part of collaborative nature here, I think, and that is, to your point, Julie, as well, where you really do have to have a really deep discussion with your partners about what do you guys want to do? What's the vision?
Absolutely.
How is this going to work? Right? Because words on paper mean only what they mean on the paper, right? If everyone doesn't agree, they're kind of like, fine, I'll go along with it. But the reality is, to your point, exactly, Dave, that disgruntledness is going to grow. It's going to get worse. And at some point, then it's going to get ugly and that person's going to leave. So when they do, having a plan that they can exit and know exactly what happens is another thing where the partnership agreement can step in.
Absolutely. We have in our partnership agreement provisions for if somebody wants out, here's how that's going to look. Or if somebody dies, what happens to their 33%? We have all that hammered out in advance. That way, when it comes time, we're not just dealing with the grief of losing our friend. We're also we already figured this out. We just have to execute the plan.
And I'll give you an example why that can get messy, right? If you have a 3-person partnership, one of them dies and there's no plan, well, their estate, maybe their widow might come along and say, well, that was my spouse's interest. I own that now, and I want a piece of the business, right? The other 2 owners might say, you will know nothing about business.
Yeah.
We've never met you in our
Right.
life. Who are you to come into our business? And operating or partnership agreement can answer that. It can say, if this person leaves or passes, here's what happens with their interest, right?
Mhm.
Do the partners have first right at purchasing that interest, right? And that can resolve it. And so if everyone agrees to it, if someone does, unexpectedly die, the partnership agreement can kick in. And again, you're not now being dragged into a potentially messy legal situation, which is going to cost you, again, far more
Yes.
than it would have been to just draft the operating or the partnership agreement.
Time and money. Also, life insurance can be really helpful in those situations, right? But what I see often in the situation of a partnership is there's a buy-sell policy where
Okay.
if the owner, one of the partners dies, the life insurance the goes to the business is the beneficiary, and they can buy out the
Yes.
spouse or the heirs.
So correct, exactly. And to your point again, this is where having the right people in place, your accountant, your lawyer, having a good insurance agent involved to kind of help advise you on what to do they all kind of intersect here,
Mhm.
right? Key person insurance is another example where if something happens to that person was a key member, right? That insurance that, to your point, pays that money out to the practice, and you have the money that they now would have lost they lost it from that person passing, right? And they
Right.
can buy out the partner, or it could be that the spouse or the estate becomes a silent partner, and what happens in that case? And in fact, there are some times where a partner might say, I don't want to have anything to do with the operations. I don't want to do it. I'm happy to be in business with you guys. But I really don't want to have anything to do with it. Right. So they can become a silent partner.
Mhm.
Right. And so essentially then the partnership agreement can say, okay, well, day-to-day decisions are going to be made by this person or these people. Right. And on key votes or key decisions, maybe all 3 can weigh in. Right. So again, that's another area where this lays it out. I again go back to my example. It's like, I don't want to say baseball, but it's like a game, right? What are the rules of the game? If people don't understand the rules of the game, that's how fights happen. But if we have a core set of rules that everyone understands and everyone can access and go to that core rule book and see, here's how things are supposed to happen, that can resolve a lot of disputes, right? Or at least help, maybe reduce the amount of
Yes.
the severity of the disputes.
Dan, I love that analogy so much. My husband is a huge lover of board games. Like, that is his thing. In the pandemic, he completely geeked out on board games, like a bunch of Kickstarters, and like that is his thing now. But when there is a disagreement during the board game, we go to the rule book, right? What do the rules say? And then like it alleviates the pressure,
Right.
because then you've got like, okay, the rules say this is our interpretation of it. It's already been decided. So I like that.
Yeah.
That analogy.
It's not like playing Monopoly with my son where the rules don't matter. It's what the
Right.
9-year-old says. Right.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Like,
but the rules are right there on the table. Look at the
hiding
rule book. No.
money under the
Right.
table. Yeah.
For all the Calvin and Hobbes enthusiasts, that's Calvin Ball. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And
So
that's exactly right. It is a rule book. Essentially, it is a guide to how things are supposed to go.
What other things need to be considered? I'm thinking someone is incapacitated or becomes disabled and can no longer work.
Mhm.
What happens
Yep.
then? Uh,
And to that point, just so you know, there are
yeah.
other than related things that come into play here, right? So when you talk about what happens if this person is incapacitated or dies, right? Great.
Mhm.
Now we're talking business succession plans. So what happens when that person's suddenly out of the picture? So there may be other supporting documents that come into play here too, right? I mentioned accounts earlier. This is a big one, money, right? Who has access to the checkbooks? Who has ability to, purchase things for the practice? Is there a certain amount that you cannot purchase over? Right. So each partner could be allowed to purchase, if they want something up to $5,000. But if you're going to make a $50,000 purchase, you better consult with your partners.
Yeah.
Right. So how does that work? Right. Who has access to those books? When can you make the decisions about what to buy? It could even involve, hiring decisions, setting specific roles. This person's going to do this in the practice, be the practice manager. This person's going to be the financial CFO, however you want to do. And the reality is, this is what I said originally, is it goes back to each practice, right? So one practice, they may look similar, but there may be different provisions or the way those provisions are spelled out for each one of those practices,
Yeah.
right? But I would challenge everyone who's listening to think to yourself, okay, if I'm running a practice, or if you do run a practice on a day-to-day basis, right? All the decisions that you make, some of them you just do automatically, right? Okay, I need to hire someone today, so I want to hire someone. Okay, we need to decide on a new office space. Okay, great. We need to sign a new lease agreement. Great. We want to open up a new bank account. Cool. We want to get life insurance or the practice. Every one of those decisions is something that the operating agreement, the the partnership agreement can address, because those are all areas where if the partners are not in agreement, there can be conflict.
Yeah. All right. I want to end with one final question to both of you. What are some of the areas where you see the most friction for partnerships?
I'm so glad you didn't ask me what business book I've read, because I have not read a single business book.
I heard there's a book about profit first for therapists that's pretty good.
Oh,
Oh.
Dan, buttering me up.
That's first on the list.
No, so I'll start there. It comes down to what I've seen is fundamental disagreements about the partners, about what's supposed to happen, right? And then obviously, because money always has this impact, right? What's happening with the money? Right? Do I feel as a partner that I'm getting cheated out of my fair share? Am I not getting enough, but someone else is? Right? These aren't spelled out right. Now all of a sudden you have a big problem, right? If I'm a partner and I go out and I say, hey, everyone, I bought a van for our practice, and everyone's like, we don't need a van. Why would you spend $50,000 of our money? Right? Oops, you're not allowed to do that. The partnership agreement makes that very clear, right? But if it's not in writing, have they done something wrong? No, but you just lost $50,000.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so it's those core things that on a daily basis or more regular basis, it's not, thankfully, usually it's not as common that all of a sudden someone drops dead. Right. But obviously it happens. Deaths and taxes are pretty common, right? They're the most common things, I guess. Right.
The certainties, death and
Yes,
taxes.
certainties. That's the word I'm looking
Yes.
for. Thank you. Certainties. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I would say on my end, it's making sure that the money is fair to everybody. That's always going to be the challenge, because everybody's got their own financial needs and wants and goals, and their own ideas of how the money coming in gets split up. And so it's just making sure that everybody feels like the split, the way it's done, is equitable. That's a balancing act sometimes, and we do our best. And I think we do a pretty good job of making sure everybody's needs are accounted for.
There's one other really, really, really big provision that I didn't mention that affects all this stuff we just talked about. And that's the ability to amend or change the agreement. And that is a core, provision. Is, okay, let's say we do want to make changes. How do we do it? Right? If all of a sudden one party or one person says we're going to do it this way, the other two say we don't agree, right? The it says amendments or changes can be done this way by vote, whatever it is, it lays it out.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna end this episode with my thoughts on partnerships. And this may be an unpopular opinion, but I think in a lot of cases, perhaps not in yours, Dave, but in a lot of cases, partnerships, people who say we want to start a partnership, they really just want to share expenses. That is often the case where they wanted to share maybe the cost of software, cost of an admin, but not necessarily like really be intertwined in this almost marriage-like relationship. And so that's where I kind of see a lot of the friction, where what we intended really was sharing expenses, and they did not realize that how deep they were intertwining their lives. So on that note, where can our listeners find you both?
Well,
Well,
you can
there-
go to protectingyourpractice.com to find the podcast. You can go find me personally on danielmayerlaw.com. Pretty easy. Dave,
And-
what about yourself?
And I'm at Maryland OCD and Anxiety Therapy, which you can Google, or it's mdocd.com. And you can find my practice there.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining me today on this partnership episode.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much for having us.